I'm Larry Tyler, and
I'm Ron Drez.
we are here at the Pensacola Grand Hotel
Reunion.
for a reunion with Hotel 25.
Yeah, in fact, it's our ninth reunion. Glory be. We found each other in 2008. We've been going at it ever since.
Yes, this is fun. So we're sitting here at the hotel and going to just jump into some questions. So why don't we start out by you, Ron, telling us a little bit about where you're born and raised, and how you ended up joining the Corps. Why did you choose to go the path you
Sure,
went,
yeah.
and a little bit about your educational background.
Yeah. Well, I was born before World War II. I was born in March the 2nd, 1940. So when I came up as a kid, I really came up through the war years, and when the war ended, I was almost 6 years old. So my early remembrances were of victory gardens and smashing cans flat and doing recycling and going with my mother as she watched the guy pick out the chicken and wring his neck, and we had coupons, and it was that sort of thing. And as time went on, I did what normal kids did, and that's went to school. And in high school, I really became kind of enthralled with the Marine Corps. I had seen all the pictures. I loved John Wayne. I had a little picture about this big hanging over my bed of the flag raising on Iwo Jima. If you could believe that. I was, 10, 11, 12.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah, well, it was the most famous photograph ever taken, and I just was enthralled with it. So after I got out of high school, I went to Tulane University, and in so doing, joined the Naval ROTC. And there I met a future commandant of the Marine Corps. He was a Marine officer instructor at the time, a major by the name of Robert Barrow. Oh, he was just everything. He was the Marines' Marine. And so amongst that Navy class, he recruited about, 10 or 12 of us to go Marine option. And that's how it all started. So when I got commissioned out of Tulane University, I wasn't commissioned an ensign. I was commissioned a second lieutenant in the United States Marine Corps.
Okay. About that time, what years were those? And what was going on in the world at that point in time?
Well, pretty hectic because in 1957, we were in the Cold War and in a space race, and all of a sudden the Russians threw up Sputnik. What a traumatic experience for Americans that was.
Yes,
A lot of people don't remember, this was just about a 10 or 12 pound little satellite that they beat us into space. And so the American public had been practicing years of, hey, if an atomic warhead comes, duck under your bed, duck under your desk. And here it was, 57, and the Russians beat us into space. So as we were all graduating from high school and getting into college, we had some pretty traumatic experiences. We had the Bay of Pigs, which we lost and made Kennedy look really bad. And then as I'm wrapping up basic school, getting ready to go to Fleet Marine Force, the Cuban Missile Crisis comes. The unit I'm supposed to go with deploys and goes down to Guantanamo Bay. And I joined them when they came back a month later, and then went to Okinawa. So those early years in the 60s were, you were expecting something to happen. And being in the Marine Corps and deployed overseas, we were a special landing force. We floated here and there, all over, waiting for something to happen. So that was my first years of the Marine Corps. All of those events that really weren't favorable to us.
Well, how did you end up getting to Vietnam? What were the circumstances involved? And tell us what month and years you were involved, or when you were there.
Yeah. Well, after the deployment to the Far East, I was with 3rd Marine Division at the time, came home and spent another 15 months in California, still FMF, but with the 1st Division. And then came the Tonkin Gulf resolution, the attack on Maddox and Turner Joy, and the battalion mounted out and went to Vietnam. And I was mounting out, my wife and I were just married for a year. She was getting ready to deliver a child and called up and said, hey, I got to go again. But as Providence would smile on us, they did not cancel my orders, and I went for the next 2 years to a Marine barracks in the Caribbean, which was wonderful. But time caught up with me, and the next tour, I went to Vietnam and landed in the middle of the Tet Offensive.
Right in the middle of the 1968
Yeah,
Tet Offensive.
right.
How exciting, right?
Well, it was one of those things that I've often joked about and said, when my plane landed, the enemy said, "Drez is here, let's get this thing on."
Well, I know, according to history, 1968 and 1969 were the two most intense
Yes.
years of fighting in the Vietnam War. And it seems that you arrived just in time to participate in all of that. Explain to us a little bit about some of your experiences when you arrived there. And also tell us where you fit in, and also give us a little bit of the command structure as such. You had some men that you oversaw and was involved in, and so on. Would be helpful just to understand
Sure.
the structure. And who was your boss?
Yeah, well, actually, when I arrived in a driving rainstorm. The 1st Marine Air Wing was taking off from the runway, not even getting its wheels up, and dropping bombs on the other side of the fence. That's how close the NVA, 2nd NVA Division had gotten. And I was assigned to 3rd Marine Amphibious Force. I didn't know what I was going to be doing in 3rd Marine Amphibious Force, but next thing you know, I found myself up in the Command Operations Center, working with intelligence and operations, and my boss was the senior commander in Vietnam, and that was Lieutenant General Robert E. Cushman.
Now, was this down in Chulai or up in Da Nang?
This is up at Da Nang.
Okay.
And so I said, well, here I am, and everything's going crazy around us. Cushman came into the COC one night, and I happened to be on duty, and the walls are shaking. It was an old French hotel, which they hadn't built a concrete bunker yet, so we're in this old French hotel. And I guess a couple of rounds landed. All of the fluorescent bulbs shot out of their holders, crashed down among us. Where you're sitting, it was where Cushman was to me, and we're both in helmets and body armor, and his aide or somebody, a colonel next to him, dives under the desk. And Cushman looks down like, he and I standing up, and winked over to his second in command and said, "Get rid of this guy." So anyhow, that's what I did, and I was involved in that for about 5 or 6 months until I went down to 1st Marine Division and took command of a rifle company.
And that was called Hotel.
Hotel Company, 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines.
Right. Okay. And you went down to Anhua
Anhua, right.
at that location?
Yeah, the
And-
5th Marines had been up at Way City, and then they moved to Anhua after the Citadel was recaptured.
And this is in the fall of 1968.
Yeah,
What-
September.
September,
Right.
when you arrived down there. Well, tell us a little bit about the NCOs and the men that were assigned to you that you were involved with.
Yeah, it was a strange thing. Lieutenant Colonel James Stemple, who was the battalion commander, came up to me and said, "Ron, get down there and take over this company." They've had a few bad experiences. They had been ambushed 2 or 3 times in a little place called Lanam. And it was a very bad area in the Arizona area. And when they did, they didn't do very well. They suffered a lot of casualties, and so he thought that a few of the things that had gone wrong was because they weren't led properly. Whether that was the case or not, I don't know. But when I went down, I hardly even had time to introduce myself to them. It was, "Fellas, I'm here, mount out, we're going back into the bush." And the first thing that we did was go back into that Lanam area and promptly got ambushed again for the 4th time. And it took me all day to turn the company and back out of it and attack the enemy. But we learned a lot from that, and once that had happened, there was a better air of confidence. The NCOs were terrific. The men were great. They were just looking for confidence and somebody to lead them. And I had no officers. I had one second lieutenant and he was killed the first day that I took command. So really I spent a great portion of the time with sergeants and staff sergeants as platoon commanders. But I couldn't ask for better.
Now, how many men served under you?
Reinforced, we were about 200, about sometimes as big as 215, but once you were in an operation, that whittled down pretty fast, and you were around 180.
Okay. What was the environment like as far as the terrain and also the weather and all of that type
Yeah,
of
you
thing?
had 2 seasons. You had the dry season and the wet season, and the wet season was really bad because it was the north. You had 2 monsoons. You had the southwest monsoon and the northeast monsoon. And anybody that's been out there, yourself included, knows that when that monsoon comes, it's not a rainy afternoon. It rains for 25 days in a row. But you also had 2 battlefields. You had the paddies and you had the mountains. The rice paddies were where you were going to make big contacts, big fights, lots of hard-fought battles, not against the Viet Cong. I never fought against the Viet Cong in my entire career. Up north, we was always the North Vietnamese Army. And I think if we spoke to most veterans, love to fight the Viet Cong. It was like pushing a hot fork through a pound of butter. But the NVA had the 5th largest army in the world. We had the 3rd largest. And so it was like playing a Saturday football game, number 3 against number 5. And they were tough troops, really well equipped. And in the north, they had their artillery. Down where we were, they had mines, booby traps, ambushes. An easy way in to attack us through the Laos-Cambodia border, through the big Annamite Cordillera, which was the western boundary of Vietnam, and sanctuaries, all those things.
I seem to recall that you were on several operations. Do you remember the names of those and describe them a little bit? I know one was out near Coney Island area during the late fall, and then there was another one up in the mountains. Give us a little detail about that.
The first operation that I participated in was Operation Mameluke Thrust, and that was a sort of a rice denial operation to let the farmers harvest their rice without having the NVA Army steal it from them. So we would cordon off a field, and you'd have all the people harvesting the rice, and we just sat there and made sure that no enemy came in. Then we went partially into the mountains for Operation Maui Peak, and that was an Army Special Forces camp at Thong Duc that got surrounded. And we went up there to try and help them out. Then we came back and did more in the rice paddies, rice denial, county fair, harvest moon, all those things, people-to-people program. But in the summer, the North Vietnamese Army made a second huge push like they had made in Tet. Not quite as big. But later on we found out that what they were trying to do was get in to attack Da Nang, Hoi An, actually get it back up to Hue. And we experienced that in a couple of places that are instantly recognizable by any man who fought there. Gonoy Island and Dodge City, and to the west, the Arizona area. Those places were just deadly. And so deadly that when you went out into Dodge City or Gonai, you knew that you were going to have a big fight on your hands. And it was a direct vertical connection between the enemy and Da Nang. That's what we were doing the whole time.
Some folks that watch some of the movies of the Vietnam War always see the troops walking through the rice paddies. They don't ever see or understand about the jungles. Can you describe a little bit about when you were up in that triple canopy type of forest? How was that maneuvering troops and getting around and doing all that up there, and describe some of the obstacles and challenges that you had in the mountains?
the mountain battlefield was entirely different, and you had to learn it fast. And the first time I went into the mountains, I was no more prepared to fight there than I had been to fight in the paddies. Fighting in the paddies where you could deploy, you could get a company online, you could attack. In the mountains, you were on the triple canopy jungle, usually a huge ridge line. You had to get along the ridge line and maneuver. You could never bring the entire force of your company to bear. It was usually a small axis of attack. The enemy knew the jungle, we didn't. And then the weather. The weather was our real enemy. You got socked in, means you couldn't evacuate a wounded man out, which was very depressing. You couldn't get supplies in, and the enemy could choose his battleground. You couldn't maneuver him where you wanted him to fight. You had to confront him in the jungle, and it's very, very difficult.
As we've already described in the 68-69 time frame when it was the most intense fighting going on, during that time, Hotel 25 took on some of the highest KIA percentages.
We did.
How did you feel about all that, and how did you deal with all of that over time?
Well, whenever we went out, all of the 5th Marines, not just 2nd Battalion, but when you went out, you were going to be in a big fight. And we ended up on an operation that started off very innocently. It was called Operation Mead River. It's supposed to be a big area where we're going to throw a big net around it, another people-to-people program, sift through the population, get rid of the infrastructure, and that was going to be it. It was a civic action program to begin with. When we threw this net out, we didn't realize it, but in addition to catching and rounding up all the people who were VC or NBA infrastructure, we trapped the 36th NBA Regiment in that net. We didn't know it at the time. That began on the November the 20th of 1968, and Hotel 25's job was just to block, to sit here and not let them get out. Other units were crisscrossing in this big cordon, and we were just sitting there eating our sea rations, minding our own business and saying, glad it's not us. As the final part of that operation came, we were experiencing in our blocking position naval gunfire from New Jersey, pounding this area. B-52 airstrikes, TPQ-10 missions, A-6 intruders, Puff the Magic Dragon, all of this on this little area which was about 1,000 yards wide and about 7 miles deep. And every night we said, glad it's not us. Until 4 days before the operation ended, they had been in such a bad fight, they heli-lifted H-25 into the battle area and into the line. And that was some of the fiercest fighting that was ever done in all of Vietnam. In those 4 days, well, not just the 4 days, the second day of the battle, I had 7 men killed, 21 wounded in a period of about no more than 2 hours against the place called the Northern Bunker Complex. Very, very bad area. We finally defeated them all. Our company in those 4 days killed 55 of them, captured I don't know how many weapons, crew-served weapons, and a lot of documents and maps. Some of the hardest fighting that was ever taking place.
Combat, of course, was often and intense, but there must have been some times that were downtime, good times, or
Yeah.
funny times. Can you describe an event or two that was different than combat?
Yeah, I've often said that combat is 10% terror, and the other 90% is boredom intermingled with some very, very funny incidents. Give you an idea what's called funny, it's sort of gallows humor. In this attack against the bunker, we didn't have a broken arrow. A broken arrow was the signal for, hey, I'm in a real hum, anything that's in the air, get over here. But we had something like it. We couldn't break the line, and so our air NCO called for anything that was in the area, come to us. So we had them stacked up on the top, trying to run missions in, and in those running of the missions, we had a short napalm round come in. Well, napalm, you just know you're dead. If it hits on you, it's going to explode and incinerate you. Not like a bomb that maybe you can escape the shrapnel. And it came in behind us, and the one round that came hit behind us and took a small skip past us before it went off. And then whoosh, this big inferno, all that jelly gasoline going this way. And I looked over and I saw a Gunnery Sergeant Charles E. Jackson. He's deceased today. And he's hiding behind a little banana bush about this big. And everybody had looked at him and said, and what was that going to protect? You've just survived this inferno, and the first thing that comes is a funny comment. Things like that.
That's exciting. Well, tell us a little bit about how did you deal with the transitioning from coming out of combat and coming back to the States, and what was that like? And what was your experiences? Everybody's had different experiences, of course,
Yeah.
but what was yours in transitioning out?
Well, it was a funny thing. I never had any premonition of death. I really didn't. I knew that it was always a possibility. I always said a prayer anytime I went into combat that, Jesus, if you want me here, I come. But if not, I'm going over there. So you can stop me or you can let me go. And as time came and you get a little bit shorter and you know you've survived and now you're down to 2 weeks and you're down to 1 week, and I still never felt that okay, at the very end he's going to really be nasty to me and kill me. But then I started thinking about, when I get out of here, what am I going to do? Well, I had put in to resign from the Marine Corps, but I couldn't do that and be sure that was going to happen because I was a regular officer. And they had given me orders to go to language school in Washington to study Cambodian, and that really irritated me because I said, what am I going to do with that? Well, you remember a year later they went back to Cambodia. So as the time came for me to come home, I was super excited. I had 2 little boys that hardly knew me. The oldest one knew me a little bit. The second one didn't know me at all. And I had a daughter who was born that I never saw. So great anticipation looking to see this family that I'd left behind. And at the last minute, the Marine Corps released me. So all of a sudden, I'm home and unemployed.
Okay.
So it's a big transition, as you know, going from the military to civilian world. And I said, you know what? I'm just going to put one foot in front of the other, and this is a new life. I'm not going to look back on the old one. I'm not going to say, oh, I'm going to do this in the new one. And when I came home, I've often felt that the reason why I came home and was so stable is I came home to a family. I had a wife and I had children and a child I hadn't seen. My mother and dad was still alive. I wasn't a fellow that had gone from a broken home into the family, into the Marine Corps, and then come out back to nothing. And I always thought that was a huge advantage, in any person that had a family to come home to, I think, fared out a lot better.
Well, many guys that came home from the war struggled deeply. They lost hope. They lost focus. They lost their goals, and some, frankly, turned into anger and had other difficulties. Obviously, your faith played a big part in not having you go down that path. Can you explain a little bit more about that? And I know you've already touched on your family, but which is vitally important. But I'd like to also know, how was your family affected by all that, and how what kind of changes did they see from the time that you left to go to a combat zone until you came home?
Well, the real hero was my wife, because here she was, the wife of a veteran who, on every day, she knew that I wasn't someplace in the rear with the gear, that she could get that terrible telegram. But she was also alone in the sense that the other wives that were in the area, their husbands weren't overseas. Their husbands were accountants, so they were working. And so she had this unique experience, and she's raising 3 children by herself. She had the assistance of her parents and my parents, but notwithstanding that, she's still in a little capsule all to herself. So she was the one that I thought endured a lot more than I did. Yeah, I was worried about me, but she had a lot more to be worried about. She had to worry about me and the 3 kids and herself, and what would happen if something happened to me. So when I came home, it was sheer jubilation. And when I told her, I said, "You know what, we're out," she was ecstatic. So the thing that got us both through, we both were very faith-filled people. And I always felt that there was some sort of hand over me, and that if the worst would happen, it was the Heavenly Father's will. I didn't ever look at it that whatever happened to me, I would be bitter. When the recent storm 11 years ago, Katrina came, and we lost a house and a car, and people were going to pieces, and someone asked, well, what do you think? I said, this is not the worst thing that ever happened to me. So I believe whatever I brought home was a plus forever in my life after that.
So after you were home a while, what kind of a career did you move into?
Oh, that was wild. Yeah. It's funny. I didn't know what to do. Took a job kind of selling a little bit. And then I had brought out of the Marine Corps one skill that no one else had. When I was a young second lieutenant, my executive officer, when I was over in Okinawa, said, "Ron, I'm sending you to embarkation school." I said, "Oh, God, it's a fate worse than death." Embarkation school. You learn how to load a ship for combat, for administrative. So when I came back to New Orleans, here I am in one of the largest port cities of the world, and I knew how to load a ship. So I went down to a friend of mine who was working in one of these shipping places. I said, "Hey, you got any openings?" And he said, "No." "You know how to load a ship?" I said, "Yes." He said, "You're hired." So I spent about 19 or 20 years doing that. And then later on, I went back to school to get a master's degree, and then I started writing books. Met Stephen Ambrose, and that's what I do today.
Let's talk a little bit more about your interest in writing and books, and maybe even being a historian of some past wars.
Yeah.
Can you share with us a little bit about your writings and what books you've written, and why did you pick those subjects?
Yeah, it was a funny thing. When I went back to school, I met Ambrose, who was the premier military historian. And of course, he was Eisenhower's biographer, so my association with him led me to the Army and World War II. Guys, my Marine Corps buddies are going, "Ron, what are you doing with the Army?" I said, "Well, this is what it is." So because of Normandy and Eisenhower, my first several books were about World War II and somewhat about Normandy, and then other things about events of World War II. I wrote one book about Vietnam. But then as time has gone on, the subjects have become varied. I've written about the Greek resistance. I just finished a book about the War of 1812. My newest book is about General Billy Mitchell. So it's the subject that finds you, that you don't necessarily go looking for the subject. And this latest one was the publisher saying, "Can you do something with us about this?" And so that's how all that's evolved. So this is book number 10 coming up. I never thought I'd write one book, much less 10 of them, and that's where I am.
That's exciting. Well, you've been attending many of the Hotel 25 reunions for a long time now. Why do you come, and why does your family come to these reunions?
Yeah, I wouldn't miss it for anything, because for 40 years we nobody knew anybody. We just went our separate ways. And then one day in 2008, I got a phone call from Al Gauci and one from Doc 250. And "Are you him?" "Yeah, I'm him." And that's how it started. And our first reunion in 2008 was on a farm. And oh, we were so delighted to see everybody, and you know what happened to who, and people showed up. You know, everybody's a little beat up. We had guys missing arms and legs, and suffering from some illnesses and things. But it was just so much fun, and we did it again the next year. And then we started saying, you know what, we're having so much fun. Let's go to a different city every year. So we went to Quantico, and then we went to Phoenix, and then we went to Philadelphia and New Orleans and San Diego, and here we are in Pensacola. And you can see that we just have a good time, and everybody enjoys seeing everybody, and we're all getting a little long in the tooth, and but it's still such a great time.
What one thing would you like to say to all of the men who came home from the war that knew your name, at least if they didn't know your face? What would you want to communicate to them today?
They were, just to tell them that they were great. They made, you know, I was the company commander, big deal. They were the backbone of what was going on, and they were the true heroes, because I never had to say twice, look, fellas, we want to do this. I said, we want to do this, and the NCOs, boom, and we went and did it. And when it was over with, we were a very highly decorated company. You saw last night when we had our ceremony putting those battle streamers on. This is H Company 25, which doesn't even exist anymore. And what do we have? 7 or 8 battle streamers just from Vietnam. So it's great to be with them. They're all, I never met one of them that I wouldn't want to serve with.
Got any closing comments or thoughts you want to share with us?
Well, you know, we have our ball tomorrow night, and I'm going to talk a little bit about courage. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the courage we had to show, and a little bit about some courage some other Marines had to show. And that's what it's all about. And as time has gone by, more of our H-25 veterans and Vietnam veterans are realizing that, you know, the story that was being told when we were fighting was not really the story that was going on.
Well, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate your interview and sharing this information with us.
Thank you so much, Larry. Glad to do it. Wonderful. Okay, let me just add 2 of the most traumatic experiences that I had. One was Operation Mead River, December the 8th, 1968, in the Northern Bunker Complex. And as we moved forward through this hail of gunfire, I found myself up against the main bunker complex, which I did not realize it was it. I was just leaning against this big anthill, and suddenly it dawned on me that this was the key position. And there was only myself, the gunnery sergeant, and the engineer, and everybody was everywhere else, not even close to it. So they suddenly started throwing me, signal to them, you know, explosives, grenades. Well, they couldn't reach because they were all pinned down, so they all hurled their quarter-pound blocks of C4, wasn't it a C3? C4. And I made this big ball of silly putty, about 17 pounds of explosives. And then they started throwing me their grenades, and I put all of this in my pack and stuffed 15 grenades in behind it. And then I had 2 rocket rounds that the propellant to launch the rocket was no good, but the warhead was good. And that has the hitting power of a 105 millimeter howitzer. I had 2 of those stuck in like rabbit ears. And now how are we going to get this into the bunker? So we crawled up on top, but the bunker apertures are this way. And so we made a plan, and the plan was that the engineer was going to take a strap of some sort, and we're going to toss this big 40-pound satchel charge out. When it reaches the end of its tether, we're going to guide it back in, and it's going to come in underneath us into the bunker. And of course, it's our business to get off the top. And I cut a fuse about 5 seconds, because without that, they would throw the thing back out. A 5-second fuse didn't give us a lot of time, and I splayed it back and had a cigarette and just touched the little bitty short fuse like this into a blasting cap into this big bomb, and it sparked, and we used my belt as the tether I threw it out like this. Emmons held it and came back in. He let it go, and we all tried to get off the top of that bunker. Jackson and I made it off, but Emmons was in the process of jumping when this thing went off. He did about a 1.5 gainer in the air and landed in the mud of the rice paddy, but it destroyed the bunker. That was the key position. We fought for another 36 hours, but that was it. The second event was a Friday the 13th, just 4 days later, going into Taylor Common, and my helicopter got shot down. Crashed into the jungle. No one ever survived the CH-46 crash because it burns. Magnesium skin burns at about 2,000 degrees. And as we spiraled in, it's the only time I knew I was dead. I said, oh, this is it. And we hit in the primary canopy. We were talking about the primary canopy of the jungle as opposed to the rice paddy. And the impact broke the helicopter in half. And when it did, the fuel tanks and the rear engine rotor went that way and exploded. And the 16 of us that were in the helicopter were jammed into the nose and came crashing through the trees, cushioning our fall to the ground. I don't know all this has happened. I mean, all I know is I'm screaming, get out, get out, get out. There's things that explode. The danger was already over, but you don't know that. People are diving through that half door, and we made it. And to find out later on, we were the first CH-46 ever to survive that crash. So it was, those were the two days they could have got me.
Amazing. Just amazing.